Good morning, and on behalf of Brady, welcome to our EarthWise Expo. I want to make sure that all of you know that the CEU and PDH certificates will be available when you leave. Be sure you sign the appropriate forms. And some of you have already gone through the expo next door, but be sure you do if you haven't. We'll be here until 2 o'clock, and I think you have your lunch tickets. If you don't, I'll be glad to take them and use them. That was a joke. Don, I didn't know you were there. I'll be serious. Anyway, we're glad to have you. And to those of you who have chosen to attend this session, and we expect more to come in, you're in for a real treat. Dr. Mike Walden is no stranger to those of us who live in the Triangle area. We can see him on TV at least once a week and read his quotes in the media, in the print media, on an almost daily basis. Dr. Walden is a William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor and Extension Economist in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at North Carolina State University. He's also a member of the Graduate Economics faculty with the Poole College of Management. His PhD is from Cornell, but he's been at NC State University for 35 years, if my math is correct. I'm an English major, so I'm not that good in math. But at State, he has teaching, research, and extension responsibilities. He's published 8 books and more than 250 articles and reports. His talents and his expertise have been recognized by many governors and by the UNC system and others by naming him to serve on a number of boards and commissions. And while he's a regular on local media, as I said, he's often appeared on NBC, CBS, the Fox Report, and the NewsHour with Jim Lair. He's the recipient of many awards and honors. He really represents the university well in the public service arena, which he considers to be a major part of his job. He's so dedicated that he's getting up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning to go to Greensboro for our expo there. So without my talking any further, I'm pleased to present to you Dr. Michael Walden.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you so early, and congratulate you for getting up this early to listen to economics, something that sometimes doesn't stir a lot of excitement, but I'll try to make it a little exciting. Clearly, the economy, trends in the economy, challenges in the economy have been front and center over the last 5 or 6 years. As Phil said, I've been doing this for 35 years, and I don't keep statistics on this, but I just know that I get more requests for speaking, and I get more requests for interviews when the economy is bad than when the economy is good. So I have my own little personal economic indicator. When the phone calls start to recede, when the speaking requests start to recede, that tells me the economy is getting better. You might want to know, have they receded? And unfortunately, I guess we'll say no, they have not. I want to do several things with you, and I will keep an eye on the clock. I have until 9 o'clock. I do want to leave time for questions. I can't cover everything. You may disagree with something I said. There may be something I didn't say that you want to address, so I will leave time for questions. But I want to do a couple of things with you, or try to. First of all, I want to give you some statistics, some pictures, some commentary on exactly where we are in the macroeconomy. Are we improving? Are we not improving? If we are improving, why? What are the elements behind that? I think probably a lot of you know the answers. Then I want to move into what I would call juicy part of discussions about the economy, and that is economic policy. And not economic policy here in Raleigh, but we're going to talk about it in Washington, macroeconomic policy, particularly coming out of the Federal Reserve as well as out of the Congress and the President, issues and debates there. And then I'll close, since you're all from North Carolina, I think most of your operations, I understand it, probably are here with clients in North Carolina. I will present some facts, figures, and analysis for the North Carolina economy. We had a lot of discussion about where the North Carolina economy is, where it's going in the gubernatorial campaign. That continues, so I want to give you some perspective on that. Regarding the trends in the overall national economy, We are in what economists call a recovery phase or an expansion phase. The slide you're looking at is gives you numbers on the broadest measure. If we had to pick one number representing the national economy, it would be this number, gross domestic product, GDP. It is the gold standard of measurement of our economy. It's a number that essentially combines everything that every business, every person does, from the farmer to the factory worker to the salesperson to the university professor, into one number. Think of it as aggregate output. Another, as an aside, another nice thing about this number is we have these numbers going back 70 years, number one. And number two, this concept has been adopted by countries around the world. So this is the number that we use to compare, for example, how big the Chinese economy is to the U.S. economy, or whether the Chinese economy is slowing, etc. As an aside, I might just say, just for a little bit of levity, a few years ago, the French were not happy with their value for GDP. Showed the French economy was not doing well compared particularly to Germany. And so at that time, French President Sarkozy hired an American economist. His name is Joseph Stiglitz, probably not a name that rings to any of you, but he actually has won a Nobel Prize in economics. He was former President Clinton's chief economist for a couple of years. Anyway, President Sarkozy hired Joseph Stiglitz to come over to France and to develop an alternative to GDP. And Sarkozy's concern was that the French, who, if you look at the numbers, appear to not work as much as Americans, and one interpretation of that would be that they value their leisure time, that wasn't being accounted for in these GDP numbers. So Sarkozy wanted an alternative. And lo and behold, Stiglitz was able to deliver, and as you might expect, this alternative showed France much better in terms of this revised GDP that took into account leisure. That's not really been picked up by a lot of countries, and I think most people thought that was more of a publicity campaign. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. You can see that GDP started to decline at the end of 2007, actually reached a bottom, local bottom, in the middle of 2009. That's your recession. So that period of time from late 2007 to mid-2009 is the officially defined recession that we've been through. And so we economists say that an economy is in recession as long as GDP is declining for at least 2 consecutive quarters, and clearly it did. Once GDP starts rising, even though it may still be below where it was prior to the recession, but once GDP starts rising, we say that the economy is out of recession. And so you can see that we've actually been in a expansion or recovery phase now for soon to be 4 years. And the latest numbers we have, actually we've got one for 4th quarter, but point will still be made. The latest numbers we have show that we now have totally recovered in terms of GDP. We are back to a level of aggregate economic output in the country that has totally recovered from where we were prior to the recession. Indeed, is a little longer. Now, before you conclude, and I'm sure you would not, but just in case any of you are thinking on implying this, that, well, it means the recession didn't mean anything. We're back, everything's fine. Clearly, no. I mean, during those quarters when GDP was going down and when it was below its potential, clearly that was creating losses for the economy. The second thing to point out is that it took us a long time, and this is going to be one of the consistent messages I'm going to give you. It took us a long time to get GDP back to pre-recessionary levels. For example, the recession of the early 2000s, particularly 2001, we were back to pre-recessionary GDP after that recession within 6 months. Here it took about 3.5 years. The other thing, final thing to say about this is we measure the severity of recessions, or one way we measure the severity of recessions is to look at, well, how far down did we go? And we lost 6%. You do the math here. GDP declined by 6% in terms of the lowest level of GDP compared to it was pre-recession. Now, some of you again may think, well, 6%, that, well, I mean, I don't know, maybe since you're business people, you probably do understand that's a reasonably big number. A lot of people who are not business people may think that's small. But just let me give you a couple perspectives on that. Again, the recession of 2001, the decline there was 1/2 of 1%. 1/2 of 1%, 0.5%. Here it was 6%. So this recession that we've just been through was 12 times as bad as the recession of 2001. The other thing to note is that sometimes people ask me, well, Mike, what's the difference between a recession and a depression? Well, it's a matter of degree, as you might expect, and there is an arbitrary point at which economists call a downturn a depression rather than a recession. Anyway, that arbitrary point is 10%. So if we had had a decline of 10% or more in GDP, we would have been referring to what we've been through as a depression. We didn't quite get there, obviously, gladly so. Still, that 6% was very significant, and indeed, what economists are now referring to, and you already see this at least in the economic literature, we're referring to this recession as the Great Recession. All right, so we are growing. Let me show you some other supporting measures of this. I'll come back to employment. If you look at factory production took a big dip. In fact, factory production declined 13%, more than twice as much as the overall GDP. And that's going to be important later if I have time when I come back and talk about North Carolina. Factory production, as you can see, again, bottomed out in 2009, and since then we've been moving up. This year we will clearly get back to pre-recessionary levels. Exports have been a very good news item in our economy. The turquoise bars there show you the growth of exports in our economy. We only had 1 year, that was 2009, where exports went down. So there's a lot of excitement. Some of you may be seeing this in some of the clients you work with. There's a lot of excitement about a renewed competitive position of the U.S. economy vis-a-vis other economies. We probably don't have time to delve into this a lot, but for example, China is experiencing very rapid increases in their internal costs. Movement of products from China to U.S. markets in terms of transportation costs, given the level of fuel costs, have gone up over the last decade. So energy costs are much more affordable now here in the U.S. with the growth in natural gas. So many experts who are looking at the U.S.'s competitive position vis-a-vis other countries like China or like Europe are actually very excited and see a renaissance there in terms of maybe not a massive movement of offshore facilities here in the U.S., but certainly a stemming of the tide of those facilities that were in the U.S. to offshore. The other thing to note on this slide is the, I guess I'll call that orange or chartreuse. That orangey color at the bottom shows you the size of our trade deficit. We still do run a trade deficit, but you can see it's gotten a lot smaller. And that is due to two things. On the export side, growth of exports. And on the import side, a reduction in imports, particularly energy imports. And I'm sure you've read a lot about this, how we are now buying significantly less, for example, foreign-produced oil. And again, with all the dynamics going on in our domestic energy industry, particularly with respect to natural gas, many people are predicting, in fact, I think it was an economist at Goldman Sachs about a month ago predicted, I believe, by 2030, that the U.S. would be totally energy self-sufficient. That is, our energy imports would be down to zero. Well, we'll see if he's right. Lending has gone up. You can see lending took a big crash. Look at that drop from 2008 to 2009. It has gradually moved up, although last year, 2012, there was a big jump. This is obviously a very key component behind the renewal of economic activity. Most businesses need access to credit. The Federal Reserve was in the fall of 2008. If any of you, I don't know if any of you saw the movie Too Big to Fail, excellent movie, a portrayal of the events in the fall of 2008 with the failure of Lehman and the effort to pass the TARP, etc. There's a scene in that movie where the actor portraying Ben Bernanke, actor named Paul Giamatti, looks eerily like Ben Bernanke in the movie. talks about, and I've recommended this movie to my students because I think it's an excellent learning vehicle, talks about the importance of credit to a modern economy. A lot of people think, well, you must be weak if you need credit. No, that's not the case. Credit is the oil for the economic engine, the economy. Even the best run business needs access to credit, short-term credit. And in this movie, Too Big to Fail, Bernanke is talking, he's giving a presentation to congressional leadership leading up to the vote on the TARP. He's talking about how credit is responsible for the flourishing and the growth of the modern economy. But at the same time, he talks about if credit were to end, it would be responsible for a crashing of the economy in this movie. And again, I highly recommend you rent it or buy it, get it on Netflix, Too Big to Fail. There's a line where he says, I think this meeting supposedly is taking place on a Thursday. This is leading up to the vote on the TARP. And again, the character portraying Bernanke says, if we don't pass, he's talking to the congressional leadership, if you don't pass this bill in the next couple of days, we won't have an economy on Monday. And all the jaws drop in the room, the oxygen is sort of sucked out. So anyway, the fact that credit has made a comeback is very, very important. Again, you can see that in 2012 we were not quite back to pre-recessionary credit levels, but we're clearly moving in that direction. Now, let me tail back to jobs. Most of what I said when I talk to my friends at the gym or talk to my acquaintances in various other kinds of functions where I'm not acting as a teacher or a presenter, but just acting as a regular guy, and we're just maybe just generally talking about the economy. Most people don't care about GDP. Most people don't follow credit trends. Most people don't follow exports. What most people do have some sense of, they may not have the numbers, is the job market. So most people in the country judge the economy and how good the economy is and trends in the economy by simply the job market. Are jobs increasing? Are jobs decreasing? How easy it is to get a job? Do you have a job? Does your neighbor have a job? Etc. Again, looking at what happened from the pre-recession to the bottom of the recession, the job market absolutely got walloped. Just unbelievable decline in the job market. We had some months, I don't know if you ever remember, I like to watch the CNBC program Squawk Box when I'm getting ready for work in the morning. My wife kind of tolerates it. She reads things she likes in the newspaper, and I'm watching Squawk Box. But anyway, I can remember some months there, I guess it was probably in 2009, early 2009, when the job numbers were coming out, where nationally we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. Unbelievable bloodbath. You can see from these numbers here that in aggregate we went from about 138 million jobs to 129 million jobs from the beginning of 2008 to the beginning of 2010. 9 million jobs lost in the country. And of course the unemployment rate went up to double-digit levels. Absolute job bloodbath. Now the good news, as you can see, is that we have started to see, and we are in the middle of a job recovery. We are, again, these, I do have slightly later numbers here. We are a little past half back. About 55% of the jobs lost during the recession have been recovered. However, that means 45% are still lost. This, I think, is obviously the major issue in the economy, the fact that we are having very slow, we are having job growth, but we're having very slow job growth. It is probably the greatest debate right now among economists. Why is the job growth so slow? Will jobs ever come back? Will we ever get an unemployment rate down to 5% again? These are issues that economists are debating and thinking about. Just to give you my particular answers very briefly, I do think that we will continue to see, in fact, in a minute I'll give you my forecast, I think we will continue to see job growth, but I think it will remain rather slow. And there are a couple things going on here. One is that, and we saw this before the recession, and a lot of you probably know this, we really had some major sweeping changes in the types of jobs that our country has been generating over the last 2 decades. A lot of it has to do with information technology. Some of it obviously has to do with the increase in world trade, the movement of some of those jobs that, for example, we had an abundance of in North Carolina when I was here, when Phil was running the state government. Textiles, apparel, furniture, tobacco. We've lost a tremendous number of jobs in those sectors in North Carolina, in the textile and apparel and furniture areas. A lot of that has been due to movement of those companies, movement of those operations overseas. But the other big trend has been the advent of information technology, and what that has done is allowed many routine jobs to be that used to be performed by humans to be replaced by machinery or technology. In fact, that's probably the best way now to classify jobs, to look at jobs that are routine jobs both in terms of making products, also routine jobs in producing services. We've had the same kind of thing there. Some of you may have experienced this in Brady. There's been a revolution in the sales business where, again, using information technology, a given quantity of sales or sales contacts can be made now with fewer sales reps, with fewer people. So we're seeing that go on, and we're seeing technology and information technology replace people. And that went on, that started before the recession, but it's now continuing. So some economists worry that given that, we're never going to get back a sizable number of these jobs simply because those jobs are now obsolete. And what we particularly worry about is we look at the long-term unemployed, people who have been unemployed for longer than a year. Statistics show those are the people that have the toughest time getting a job. And many of us economists think that one of the major reasons is because they no longer have the skills that businesses are looking for. Businesses are now looking for people who have higher levels of education, who have problem-solving capabilities. That is, to be able to do those non-routine jobs. Because if you have a routine job where you're doing the same thing over and over, increasingly you're going to have machines or technology doing that. So this is a real big issue. I think it has implications, if I can just get localized here a little bit, it has tremendous implications for North Carolina, for North Carolina's educational system. Bill was heavily involved in that for years, in terms of what kind of training we make available to students. I think my personal view is that we need to really have a very detailed conversation about this all the way from K through 12, through community college, through the educational system. All right, let me move on and talk about what has been the major reason why we have had a rebound in the economy. And it really comes to a sector that you, at least in part, I think, deal with. I suspect that in your business you put in systems both in residential areas as well as commercial areas. But I'm going to focus on residential construction and residential housing area. Economists argue that most recessions are unique. Each recession sort of has a signature. We just don't fall into recessions. Usually a recession is sparked. It's kind of like a fire. Someone unfortunately throws a cigarette into a dry forest area, and that's the spark that creates a forest fire. Same way with a recession. There's some spark that usually occurs in one particular part of the economy. And then if the spark is disastrous enough, if it's a big enough spark, and if that part of the economy is big enough, it can spread to the entire economy and cause there to be an economy-wide recession. Without a doubt, and this is really not something economists do debate at all, without a doubt, the spark that really put us into the recession was what happened in the residential housing market. And our residential housing market, which of course is an age-old market, it's a very important part of our economy. It's a part of our economy that economists and others didn't really consider to be a real exciting part of our economy. People need to live somewhere, they buy homes or they rent units, and we move on. So it wasn't an economy, and a part of our economy where there are a lot of ups and downs and dramatic breakthroughs. Even the way we build homes is not, and units has not changed all that much. But anyway, over the last really 15 years, that part of our economy did go through a dramatic amount of change. First of all, we had a tremendous boom in the residential housing market. And what this slide is measuring is the price of the average home in the country. And just as a footnote, I might say, those of you, and probably many of you are very, given what you do, given what Brady does, probably very familiar with the residential housing market. You know it's actually a challenge to come up with a single average price for a home because homes vary so much in size and amenities. They vary in location, where they are, which affects the price. What I should tell you that this index of housing prices, it's the Case-Shiller index, which is widely known, accounts for all those things. But so this is looking at the trend in the average price of a home, and you can see this goes back. Probably can't see it in the back. This is 1976, and you can see there's a little bit of bumps here. Here's the recession of the late 90s. I'm sorry, the late 80s, early 90s. You can see, yeah, there's a little bit of up and down that goes with the business cycle. But pretty much, this part of our economy was pretty calm, pretty staid, pretty unchanging, until we got to the late 70s. And you can see the tremendous rise in housing prices. In fact, if you calibrated that from bottom to peak, that would be a doubling of the average price of a home within a decade. That was the housing boom we went through. That was when lots of people made lots of money and buying and selling homes. Lots of lenders made lots of money financing homes. Builders made lots of money. The construction industry swelled. If you were, for example, an unskilled worker in say, the year 2000, or 2001, or 2002, a machine had replaced your job. You could probably find a job in building homes. So this was an unprecedented boom in the housing market. Economists have obviously gone back and tried to figure out why that happened, and there are a number of reasons why. Just again, have time to briefly go over them. Coming off of the 2001 recession, the Federal Reserve for about 5 years kept credit very cheap, interest rates very low, so financing was there. We had some demographic changes where household development was rising very rapidly. We had a change in the tax law in 1997. Which prior to that said if you were a homeowner like the Waldens, and my wife and I sold our home prior to 1997, and we made some money on that home, that is, we had a capital gain, the only way we could escape paying tax on that capital gain, or at least delay the tax, is if we bought a house of equal or higher or comparable value within 18 months. In 1997, Congress did away with that restriction. Said whenever you're a homeowner, you sell your home, you have a capital gain, guess what? No federal taxes are due on that. So that increased the tax attractiveness, if you will, of homeowning. So all these factors combined really propelled the residential housing market. You can see how prices just went up. And again, you've got to remember, this is a big chunk of our economy. If you look at all of the industries, yours are probably included, at least part of yours included, financing, construction, land development, all of the suppliers like roofers and carpet people and drapery people and furniture people, everything that goes into building a home, financing a home. You're talking about 15% of GDP, 15% of our economy. That's humongous. The tech sector right now is 4%. So you're talking about a sector of our economy that is 4 times larger almost than the tech sector. Remember, the tech sector actually, ups and downs in that sector, led us into the 2001 recession. So this sector was just bursting at the seams in the mid-2000s. And then it all came crashing down, as you can see. We had a pullback in the residential housing market. Prices came down almost back to where their pre-recessionary levels. So everything that was made, or a lot of what was made, was lost. And so this caused tremendous unemployment in the construction industry. This was responsible for the problems in the financial sector. Banks' biggest portfolio, biggest chunk of a bank, average bank's portfolio is home mortgages. Many homes became underwater, so the value, the collateral, if you will, backing those mortgages went down. This is when homeowners, just average Joe and James who owned a home and had made money, saw their equity go up, equity in their home go up, and the boom, saw it crashing down. In fact, over this time period, homeowners lost $9 trillion of wealth embodied in their home. So this was absolutely unprecedented. We had the closest we can see in the data, economists have seen the data, the kind of housing crash that we have gone through over the last 5 or 6 years is in the 1930s recession, 1930s depression. And economists have gone back and looked at that downturn in the housing market, and guess what they've concluded? This downturn was more severe. So we have been through something that our country has never been through again. And I would argue this is largely responsible for how bad the recession was, how slow the recovery has been, the extremely high levels of unemployment, the problems in the banking system, etc. Now, the good news is, you might be saying, well, Mike, you're painting a gloomy picture. Where's the good news? The good news is that last year, for the first year in, I believe, 7 years, 6 or 7 years, last year we finally saw prices for homes, average prices rise. And that's actually continued into this year. And if you look at some corresponding data on that looks at the health of the residential housing market, inventories are very low. And if you look at construction, which is the yellow, and sales, which is the green, those have both turned up. So I would argue the major reason why we have seen some optimism return to the economy, and I think the major reason why the economy has appeared to turn for the better, is that finally the residential housing market has bottomed out and has begun to turn up. Now this has had a major impact on households and how households have dealt with this. And again, I need a little bit of background here. What you're looking at here is one measure, there are many measures, but one measure of the indebtedness of households. This is looking at household debt as a percent of household income. And in the 1990s, and in the first half of the 2000s, and many of you probably know this, or at least you anecdotally know this, or heard the statistics, American households took on increasing amounts of debt. And you can see that represented by the rise in this ratio. Now, were American households being irrational? Were they throwing caution to the wind? No. Economists would argue this is very rational, because one of the factors that motivates people to take on debt, and as business people, you probably, if you think about this, you would agree, one of the factors that motivates people to take on debt is the value of their assets. If your assets go up, if you are wealthier, if you will, you can afford to take on more debt because you have wealth to back up that debt and back up those payments. And so in the 90s and the early part of the 2000s, especially in the last half of that, we had the aforementioned housing boom, which was adding equity to households' balance sheets, and the stock market was actually doing very well. So a household looking at what was happening to their financial situation during this time, and they would see their stock portfolio values go up, they'd see the equity in their home go up, they would say to themselves, gosh, we can actually afford to borrow against that. And indeed, the financial sector motivated that by creating new borrowing vehicles like home equity loans that allowed someone to actually go in and pull out some of that increased equity in their homes and spend it on whatever, cars, trips, additions to their home, etc. So we had a tremendous rise in the indebtedness of households, I would argue, prompted by the increase in household wealth. Then, of course, as the economy crashed, the housing market crashed, we lost that $9 trillion of home equity, and of course the stock market went down. Stock market's value, as measured by the Dow, was cut in half, so you had there another $12 trillion of lost wealth. Households, as the recession got going, could no longer afford these high debt payments, and they had to start what we call deleveraging. And that meant saving more money. Savings rate has gone up to about 5% from zero. That meant refraining from spending and paying off on debts. And over the last 5 years, American households have paid down on their debt by $1.2 trillion. That, I would argue, is also a major reason why the economy has been rather sluggish over the last 4 or 5 years, because households simply couldn't spend like we normally see in a typical economic recovery. Now, are we there yet? Well, you can see these debt ratios have come down very nicely. We're almost down to pre-recessionary levels, or I should say, actually pre-boom levels. Also, if you look at another measure of the relative size of debt, if you look at the percentage of disposable income that American households are having to devote to servicing their debt, that's actually right now at a 30-year low. So there are two fundamental reasons why I am cautiously optimistic about the economy, and I do think that we will continue to grow, albeit still with lots of problems. One is the revival of the housing market. That's going to not only cause more job growth in that very important sector, but it's going to be adding equity and wealth to households' balance sheets. That's going to create more confidence in households. It's going to allow households to have the confidence to go out and buy, particularly big-ticket items, which they've largely refrained from buying over the last 4 or 5 years. I think we're going to see a surge in buying. We already have seen a surge in buying autos. The housing market's coming back. I think we're going to see a surge in buying things like appliances, furniture, carpets, etc. All things that households have delayed buying. If you look at the statistics, all of those things have an immense amount of age on them. They're ready for replacement. So I think the revival of the housing market is very important to the economic recovery. The other thing is this, that households have gotten their personal financial situation back to manageable levels. All right, so let me give you some numbers there on where I think the economy might be going in the future. I give you numbers with not with a grain of salt, but with an entire salt shaker. If you look at the track record of economists, even the best Nobel Prize winning economists, the best economic forecasters, supposedly, it's not very good. For example, there's an author named Nassim Taleb. Now that name might not mean anything to you, but he wrote a best-selling book several years ago called The Black Swan. Highly recommended. It came out before the recession. He was one of a handful of economists who actually predicted the depth of the recession. He has a new book out that's on my desk that I've read. These are not books that you really have to focus. He's an extremely dense writer. He has a new book out called Anti-Fragile. One of the things he did in the book, this new book, is he said, well, let's look at the track record of economists and their forecasts. Because one of the themes of both books, the Black Swan and Anti-Fragile, is the difficulty of forecasting. In fact, the major theme of the Black Swan, if any of you read about it, is that the world is largely moved by events in the tail of a statistical distribution. There's not events in the middle, that predictable part, but in the tail. Major events with very low probability of happening, therefore very unpredictable. Anyway, in his new book, he said, well, let's see, who do we expect would be the best forecaster or the best group of forecasters in the country? And he concluded the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has probably the best stable of economists on the planet. Federal Reserve obviously has a need to engage in forecasting. They do forecasting. So he went back over the last 20-odd years and did a simple comparison of the forecast of the Federal Reserve against what happened, gave them an F. They would have failed. Very, very bad. So I just say that to lower your expectations of what I can deliver here. So I do think we're on track to continue. Now, we did have a much lower number the last time, but I think going forward we're going to be looking at 150,000, 170,000 jobs created nationally each month. Now, I will say that's a low number. If we were clicking on all cylinders, we'd be creating about 400,000 jobs a month. So although you might think that's high, that's still a relatively low number. I think GDP is going to increase by somewhere between 2 and 2.25%. And I think this is, again, primarily due to consumers spending more because of a better housing market and because of deleveraging. I skipped over a couple things, and I just want to have time to spend just a little bit on this. One is inflation. We worry about inflation all the time. In fact, when I came, Phil mentioned I've been at NC State 35 years. When I came to NC State in the late 70s, that was the big topic, inflation. All of the presentations I did then as a still wet behind the ears PhD economist was about inflation. We have inflation 10, 12, 13%. Right now, inflation is a non-issue. The inflation numbers are very well behaved. We're running on trend an inflation rate about 1.5% to 2%. That's the CPI, and this is the CPI that includes everything. I know some of you are aware there's an alternative CPI, Consumer Price Index, that excludes food and fuel. That's not what I have here. So right now the inflation rate is at bay. Many economists think that's because we still have, sellers still have weak pricing power because we still have slack in the labor market. We don't have a situation where buying is running ahead of production. The other thing I want to mention is the trends in interest rates. Short-term interest rates, which you see in this turquoise here, are effectively zero. Those are the interest rates the Federal Reserve can control to a large extent. And one of the things the Federal Reserve did early on, the fall of 2008, early 2009, when they realized we have a problem, a big problem, is they pushed their short-term rates down, and they've held them there ever since. So this is why you're not earning anything on your money market fund, on your short-term CD, short-term bonds, etc. It's compliments of the Federal Reserve. Now, long-term rates, they don't directly control. They can try to influence through their bond buying and selling. But the trend in long-term rates, as you can see, has also been down. We've actually flirted with long-term rates, and these I'm looking here at using the 10-year Treasury note as the benchmark here. We've actually flirted with long-term rates of as low as 1.5%, which when we did have the rates that low, that was a historic low. And by historic, I mean forever in the country. Went back to the late 1700s. You could never borrow, federal government could never borrow that cheaply. Now, we've had a little bit of a rebound since then, but still very, very low. As an aside, this is one reason why the federal debt, the size and growth of the federal debt hasn't manifested itself as a big budget problem yet, because interest payments on the debt are very low. In fact, interest payments on the national debt are as low today as they were 10 years ago, and yet the debt is about 3 times higher. So that does lead many to worry about what's going to happen when interest rates do start to go up, which I think they will eventually, although I don't see that happening this year. All right, time is rushing ahead. Let me say a couple words about government policy. Probably, let me get fiscal policy first. Let's see, where am I? Both the Bush administration and the Obama administration in trying to deal with the recession employed what economists would call traditional Keynesian economic policy. The Bush administration focused more on the tax cut side. The Obama administration is focused more on spending, although they did have some tax cuts in the stimulus plan. And what Keynesian economic policy says is that when you have a recession, and when everyone is gloomy, when no one wants to hire, when no one wants to spend because confidence is low, the entity that can intervene and try to change the sort of mental dynamics, because psychology is important here, is the central government. And what Keynes recommended is that central governments come in and try to jumpstart the economy by either reducing taxes, putting more disposable income in people's pockets, and or increasing spending, government spending. And really, since Keynes promoted that idea in the 1930s, it's really been the mainstay economic policy. Again, different nuances depending on whether it's a Republican or Democrat administration. And so we had that. We had that from the Bush administration, the Obama administration, to be very, very nonpartisan. Now, Keynes also recognized, he's very clear in this, if you read his book where he laid all this out, which I do not recommend you read. It's Keynes was many things. He was not a good writer. The government's going to go into debt to do this. If it's taxing less and spending more, you're going to have an increase in debt. And indeed, we have had that. You can see one measure of the debt that I look at here is the national debt as a percent of GDP. And we went from about 60% in 07 to 100% today. And obviously that's a concern. Now, to be fair to Keynes, Keynes argued that he recognized this and said, well, when the economy gets better, he wants the central government to do the opposite, reduce spending and raise taxes in order to pay down the debt. And that's sort of where we are right now. We're debating that. I think everyone recognizes the debt's too high and it's likely to go higher. We don't have political agreement on how to address that. The Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, a lot of people know, have heard about the Federal Reserve. There may be a little fuzzy about what exactly it does and how it does it. The Federal Reserve actually celebrates its 100th anniversary this year, at least the passage of the Federal Reserve Act this year. So it's been around a century. The Federal Reserve is a very unique institution. It is a part of the federal government, yet it's not financed by the federal government. Bernanke does not have to go up to Capitol Hill hat in hand and say, give me a budget. Bernanke has his own budget. For a bank, a financial institution to be part of the Federal Reserve, they have to pay fees to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has a flush budget. So the Federal Reserve has a lot of leeway. We have told, through the Congress, has told the Federal Reserve, we've told the Federal Reserve, we want you to operate your policies to do two things. First of all, we want you to keep the inflation rate low. And secondly, we want you to do things that will move the economy toward full employment. That is a very, very tall order. And most Federal Reserve boards, Bernanke is the head of the Federal Reserve Board, have to choose which are they going to focus on. You really can't do both equally at the same time. And so with inflation, at least right now, low, Bernanke and company have focused on doing things to try to increase economic growth and thereby increase employment. And they've done two things. One, they've moved interest rates they control to very, very low levels. You've already seen that. This is their short-term interest rate. You can see that it's essentially at zero. The other thing the Federal Reserve has done, can do and has done, is essentially create credit. And that's represented by the green line. And they've been very aggressive in creating credit. And this is where people sometimes, when I say this, people can't believe it. You might say, well, how's the Federal Reserve create credit? They just do it. They just add a zero to their balance sheet, asset side. The Federal Reserve essentially can print money. And they've been doing that. They've been creating credit, and they've been either pushing that into the banking system. Banks are now flush with loanable funds. Or the Federal Reserve has been using that credit they create to buy assets, particularly home mortgages, to try to support that sector. Now, this is where people worry. They worry that they look at that and say, well, that sounds too easy. So there's got to be a downside. And the downside is that if we were in a situation where the Federal Reserve is think of it as printing money, and they're printing money at a rapid rate, and all those dollars are getting into the economy, and you've got more dollars floating around than there are things to buy, you're going to get an increase in inflation. And we've had that situation happen several times. Bernanke is well aware of that, but this is where I think he's picking his target. Right now, measured inflation is low. Clearly, we're nowhere near full employment. So I think Bernanke has decided he's got to focus, do what he can on the employment side. At some point, though, hopefully we will get to, and I say hopefully because I think it will represent an improvement in the economy, we'll get to a situation where the economy is strong enough that we'll start to see inflation bubble up. And then the Federal Reserve will have a very, very important task on their hands is how to deal with that. And do they start to withdraw from stimulating the economy and focus more on keeping inflation low? That's probably not an imminent issue. It's probably at least a year or two away, but that will be a very, very difficult task for the Federal Reserve to address, probably equally as difficult as what Bernanke did in late 2008 and 2009. All right, just have a couple more minutes, and then depending on timing, if you do, someone has a very, very important question. I'll only have time to show you two slides from North Carolina. North Carolina has come back from the recession. First of all, we suffered much more during the recession than the overall national economy. You can see that with our unemployment rate. This is not unusual. I wrote a book a few years ago called North Carolina Connected Age. The UNC Press published it. In researching that book, one of the things I found was, you know what, North Carolina suffers more during recessions. It's not new. And the reason is we're still more of a manufacturing state. 20% of our GDP is in manufacturing. It's 10% for the nation. And manufacturing products are one of those things people can postpone buying during recessions. So it makes sense that we tend to get hit harder during recessions, and clearly we did in this recession. On the other hand, we tend to come back faster. And believe it or not, we have come back faster during this recession. Again, these are a little out of date, but if you look at the rebound in the job market in North Carolina compared to the nation, from February 2010, when the job market bottomed out, through March of 2013, the latest numbers we have, North Carolina's jobs in North Carolina have increased by 5.4%. In the nation, they've increased by 4.5%. You might say, well, why isn't our unemployment rate lower? Well, it's not lower because we went up to a much higher level. We've actually come down in the unemployment rate slightly faster than the nation. The other thing, keeping our unemployment rate high, is we lead the nation. We're one of the top 5 states in migration. By in-migration, I don't mean people coming from other countries here, people coming from other states. They still consider North Carolina a great place to come, live, work, find a job, but until they do get a job, they get added to the unemployment rolls. The last thing I will show you, however, is the condition of the economy in North Carolina is dramatically different depending on where you are. These numbers are showing you growth in jobs since, again, February 2010, the bottom of the job market in the various metro areas of the state. And as you look down this list, what do you see? Well, you see the top sectors or top metro areas are Charlotte, Raleigh, Burlington, etc. The low ones, Wilmington, Greenville, Winston, etc. So we have a lot of variability around the state in terms of economic conditions. We are not one state economy. I would argue we're probably, if you, depending on how you slice it, we're probably about 20 individual localized economies. And what's happening in our state is happening in a lot of states. The big metro areas are the areas that are growing fastest. The smaller areas, particularly rural areas, many rural areas are struggling. I think the latest census numbers that came out, I think 15 counties, was somewhere between 10 and 15 counties have actually lost population since 2005. All right, slightly after 9, I don't know where Crystal is, if I need to exit right now.